Well, greetings to you. The old hoary chestnut's turned up again, hasn't it, for the first time in over 50 years, and that is capital punishment. Well, it was funny because I was at school, I think, in the mid 1960s, and I was debating in the school debating society whether we should retain, because it was a hot topic at the time, whether we should retain capital punishment or not. In fact, I spoke in favour of retention, in point of fact. That's neither here nor there. It's raised its head again because the chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, has said that he's in favour of it, and I think he's starting a debate again. And I think as so much time has gone by, I think we really need to look at some of the aspects of this to help. If it does go to a referendum, I don't think it will, but if it does, to give you some information that might help you come to a decision one way or the other. Firstly, we have to look at the disappointing degradation of our judicial system in a number of ways. We have a politicised Crown Prosecution Service. We have a very poor standard of judiciary these days, and there are examples that you can see in the press almost weekly. We also have degraded our system of jury service. When I was debating that at school all those years ago, you had to be over 21 years old to be on a jury and a property owner. That meant you have to be have some depth in society and some depth of intellect in order to be a householder and over 21, not always. But certainly the system of jury we have at the moment, where if you happen to have attained the age of 18, you can sit on a jury, which is absurd. It's ludicrous. Children, basically, children on juries. That is not judgment by your peers. So we have a difficult judicial system which has changed enormously from all those years ago, and not for the better. So we would have to look at that. We would have to, if we brought it back capital punishment, we would have to look at the jury system, the judicial system, and various other things in order to make that work. We'd also need to look at the crime of murder. And we'd almost certainly have to go down the American system of murder 1, murder 2, murder 3. Book him, Dano, murder 1, remember all that sort of stuff. Because you would have to set out your stall on this basis so that your woman being beaten by a drunken husband who reaches out for a knife which is on the table and kills him is obviously a murder 3, and somebody who kicks open the door of a post office and kills the people behind the desk in order to take the cash, that's a murder 1. And you would have to look at that. That was something that you'd certainly need to be looking at. So that's a question of the practicalities, if you will. We also need to look, do we not, at the deterrent effect. Now, this is where things get a bit complicated because it's very difficult. You'll be blinded if we had this referendum by statistics that say, oh, well, people who want to bring back the death penalty say that it's a deterrent against murder, but it isn't. Look at the figures. Now, you can't look at the figures because you're comparing apples with oranges. What would have definitely been murder 50 years ago, definitely murder, now can go down as manslaughter. You have a degree of plea bargaining, which is almost quite extraordinary, which is why you see people getting derisory sentences for what you would regard as the man on the Clapham omnibus as being hopelessly inadequate. That's one of the things. So you have to look at all that aspect as well. Then you have to look, as we were told 50 years ago, that, okay, we're getting rid of the death penalty, but life sentences will mean life. Laughable. Lies again, of course. Most of the population, in the 1950s and 60s were in favour of retention. It was our system of government and our system of parliamentary representation which actually got rid of it. It wasn't the will of the people. It was will of our representatives in Parliament. And certainly I live in a constituency where Sir Paul Bryan was the Conservative MP at the time, who promised his constituency faithfully he would vote to retain and then voted against. So you get the normal lying and cheating from politicians on this subject. So it doesn't matter what you say to your politicians, they'll go their own way, as they always do. And it's getting worse and worse and worse. But leaving that aside for the time being, we would have to change, make a lot of changes to the judiciary, the Crown Prosecution Service, so on and so forth. But just on a question of deterrent, let me tell you, certainly, and I'm associated with police and prison officers, so on and so forth, at the moment, and I was to a lesser extent, obviously, much over in the 1970s and 80s. Let me tell you one thing. The death penalty is a deterrent to some people. There is no question about it. And you wouldn't go out with a gun or a knife and commit a robbery if you were doing it in a gang. They would not let you carry a shooter or a knife because they knew that they could swing for it, and consequently they took that in view. So it was certainly a deterrent, for some people, quite a few people in point of fact. Then you had the moral dynamic, and people are going to agonize over this. Oh, is it moral? Oh, should the state take a life, and all this kind of thing, which of course is bogus and fake. The state takes lives all the time. The sponsorship of the war in the Ukraine has cost over 100,000 lives. Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Afghanistan. The list is virtually endless of the state taking lives. Then, of course, it was a moral dilemma. You then have to look, well, what about the situation with the murder of unborn babies or the killing of unborn babies? There's a moral dilemma there, and you will have your own view. You will have your own view of the moral dimension. So there is an awful lot to do if you feel, and you are in the majority, I would suspect, as you probably are, to bring it back for certain crimes. Certainly the Manchester bombers, for example. I don't think I'd have anybody with contention those hanging them, blowing up women and children in a theatre. There's a moral dimension there. Should they be kept alive at the expense of the taxpayer? And are they going to be let out again? And we all know, and we see it again weekly, and we remember people for really ghastly crimes of murder and so on and so forth, who are out again in 8 or 9 years. Life doesn't mean life. And the one thing that your criminal wants if he's murdered is a life sentence, because that's negotiable to get out. Minimum sentences like 25 years are very much more difficult. So life doesn't mean life, is what they told us all those years ago. It doesn't mean life. It means that people can walk free after 8 years, and we've seen lots of that. People murder, nasty murders, and they're walking about after 8 or 9 years. Shameful. That means a 22-year-old's out in his early 30s. And of course, he's free to murder again. And some of them do. So there's a lot to think about if it does go to referendum, which it won't, because there's one thing this government and governments don't like is referendums, because when we vote for something that we want and they don't want, they just ignore it. And of course, Brexit is a classic example of that. So referendums, I'm afraid, wouldn't work anyway. Governments would go their own way. But it's worth debate. It's worthy of debate. It's worth thinking about. And of course, with the increase in violent crimes that we're seeing, particularly in some of our big cities, would it be a deterrent to some of these people? Well, I don't know. But I certainly will say one thing. Some of these characters convicted in the big cities of murders, I don't want my tax going on to keep them alive, thank you very much. And if there's a moral dimension and life meant life, where is your moral dimension? Locking somebody in a cell until they die of old age, maybe for 40 or 50 years. Your moral dimension, where is that? Maybe they would be better having their lives terminated. I don't know, but only you can make that decision. We'll all have a different view. But I just thought I'd run some of those ideas past you to think about when you're in the pub and having quite heated debates in this with past experiences or anything to go by. As most of you know, my work is very heavily independently research-based, and I get my information from all over the world. It would help if you press the subscribe button and the little bell next to it, because the more subscribers I have, the more likely it is that international independent research institutes will share their material with me. It's most helpful, and then of course I'll automatically share it with you. So, surprise, won't cost you anything. Thank you very much.